Afternoon and welcome to everyone joining us for today's Interact with InterAction webinar featuring our guest speaker, Elena Kutry, Director of Education for LexisNexis InterAction. This month's webinar is Best Practices for Driving Change Management. My name is Dave Pagano. I am a Marketing Associate here at LexisNexis, and I will be your host for today's session. Interact with InterAction webinars are complementary to our customers and have been designed to help you get the most from your software by providing you with industry knowledge, plus time-saving tips and best practices for using InterAction. The format for today's webinar is a presentation provided by Elena, followed by a question and answer period. All of our attendees will be in listen-only mode for the duration of our presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them via the questions pane located on your webinar control panel. During the last 15 minutes of the webinar, Elena will answer your questions. Please note that we are recording today's event and all attendees will receive an email within 1 week with a link to the recording and slides. Also, there is a brief survey at the end of our webinar today that we ask you to please take a moment to complete. Your feedback will help us in planning our future events. Elena, at this time, I will turn the webinar over to you.
Great, thanks, Dave. So I'm so excited to present today. Those of you who attended a June webinar that I co-delivered with Dave Jacobs, you heard me reference change management because it went in answering some of your questions. And that interest really blossomed into today's full webinar. So like Dave said, my name is Elena Kutry, and I run the education team for several products here at LexisNexis, including InterAction. And there are so many fascinating parallels between change management, project management, and education. So let's just jump right in. First, we start here, right? So any slide that has Brad Pitt on it is a favorite of mine, but actually these three items, we have the Moneyball story, the Lyft ride-sharing company, and Google, featuring the head of legal operations, Mary Shen O'Carroll. What do these things have in common? I want you to open up your chat window in the go to webinar pane and just type in there if you have a guess on what these three have in common. What do Moneyball, Lyft, and Google have in common? Okay, I'm seeing a few answers in there. Looking good. All righty, so since the webinar is about change, yes, you might think that this is about, these are change agents. And that's partially right. They all championed innovative change with good processes and solid technology. But if change was just about adding a new process with good tech, it would be really easy to accomplish. But these three examples spotlight how they got people to change their behavior. So let's look at each one. First, in Moneyball, Billy Beane pushed for a new way to build a successful professional baseball team. He had data, he had a process, but the people around him, they were not buying into it. Next, we have Lyft. They created a brilliant ride-sharing process with revolutionary tech, but they had to persuade consumers that, yes, we should get into the car with a total stranger. And then there's Mary Shen. She heads up Google's legal operations team, where she manages outside counsel. The American Bar Association named her the 2016 Legal Rebel for her disruptive tech and processes in controlling total legal spend. She spoke earlier this year at CLOC, the Corporate Legal Operations Consortium, and she said, quote, "It can be easy to get lost in the complexities of technology and of process, but we as change agents are only successful if the project gets people to change their minds." So if we're going to be change agents, where do we start? Now, we have all seen some variation of this image that shows effective project management as the intersection of people, process, and technology. What I like best about those examples from Moneyball and Lyft and Google are that they exemplify how successful you can be when you account for all three elements of technology, process, and people. So today, we're going to drill into why. Why should we have a strategic change management plan? Then we'll touch on the single biggest challenge of change management. And then we're going to focus on 4 barriers that stand in the way of effective change for business development teams. So today, anyone can learn to be a change agent. There's a ton of classes. It'll teach you the skills. It'll teach you the 5 levels of change leadership. But the value in being a change agent is in knowing how to change the behavior of people. That's why I love this little cartoon. In our world, it's becoming more important than ever to increase end user buy-in because competition is changing the legal landscape. You know, in-house counsel from Clock, they're pressuring law firms to be efficient and lean. Accounting firms are expanding into legal work. E&Y has 1,800 lawyers who advise clients and practice law. So whether you're trying to manage changes to something small like a new client intake process or to implement CRM or to advance business development, getting people to buy into your efforts is absolutely critical. That's why. Now, a few years ago, I wrote a blog about increasing end user adoption, and it referenced this study about implementing CRM. So the survey studied 145 different firms who were working on this project of implementing CRM. And the single biggest barrier to a successful CRM campaign were the people. The lack of employee buy-in accounted for 1/3 of all CRM challenges. And this is a classic case where it's the users, not the technology or the process, that are holding the project back. And when the change doesn't happen, you're left not only with the transformation that didn't happen, but you wasted a lot of resources with time and money, plus overall morale is really diminished. So this is not a beat up on users kind of a thing, but really, why does this happen? Well, it's time for your input, again in the chat window. Strategy and Business Magazine published a list of the top 10 project pitfalls. The list focused on elements that will derail a project's success when it comes to changing behavior. Now, I've put the top 5 here, but they're in no particular order. So in the chat window, I'd like for you to put in your vote on which one you think is number 1. Is it A, users have change fatigue? B, users are just unclear on how to get work done? C, change was pushed from the top down without securing buy-in? Or D, process of one group is hampering the performance of another group? Or E, the communication was inadequate? Looking in the chat window. Seeing lots of votes. Okay. Lots of votes. Okay, so these are great. So the number 1 item on the top 10 list was E. It was the assumption that communication equals employee engagement. And so maybe you've seen this. Leaders will make this mistake of thinking that if they convey a very strong message right at the start of the project, people will get it. They'll understand exactly what they need to do going forward. But the thing about that is this is not a one and done sort of thing. Sustained change is going to require constant communication, not only at the rollout, but after the major elements of the plan are in place. when the education team works with customers, we stress that effective user adoption means everything you do with your project is done through the lens of the user. This will prevent you from getting too focused on, say, the technology, and it maintains the focus on how to support the users. If the users can buy in, the project will achieve the firm's goals. There is so much data that adopting change management strategies will drive to successfully completing more projects. Prosky is an independent research company in the field of change management. They compiled 8 years of data, and they found that projects that have excellent change management, they're 6 times more likely to meet their objectives than those with poor or no change management. But the key driver was embedding the change in the culture. Well, what the heck does that mean? Well, culture is how we get things done around here. If your project, if your change can influence how things are done, you've succeeded. So, all right, how do we do that? Well, let's drill into how to apply effective change management into our projects and how the firm does things. This is going to be kind of where we drive for most of the rest of our talk. This is what a project management plan should look like. Now, typically, it's only the blue boxes at the bottom. However, it needs to have this top layer of gray of embedded executive support, and it needs this middle layer of red boxes. This is the change management that needs to be aligned from the beginning. So at the bottom, these are our typical phases of a project management plan. This is where you take care of the process and the technology. You've got project initiation, project planning, process design, project implementation, and project closure. The middle row is the people. This is much harder to do, but it's critical to leading real change. If you're a very good change agent, you've got a vision. How do I break down the resistance? How do I engage the culture? But you don't have to have all those answers on how to do it yourself. You build a little change management team. Okay, well, who needs to be on the team? It's a project sponsor, stakeholders, the decision makers, and the doers. So there need to be attorneys and secretaries on the team as well. This cross-section of perspectives for each phase, they will outline, here's the scope, here's our process, here's our time frame, is it realistic? You need those key players to help you with the change management. So it includes all of these aspects, a sponsorship roadmap, and which we'll talk about, the communication plan, what needs to be in it, the resistance management plan, what does it look like and how do I do it? The training plan comes in here during project implementation, and the reinforcement plan. How do you make sure the changes keep going after the project is over? So let's apply this model to typical barriers that we find in law firms and their business development teams. This is the business development maturity model. Our client advisors, some of you may know them. We've got Dave Jacobs, Mandy Hayes, Pam Tobias, recently joined us from White & Case. These guys have conducted over 200 client meetings globally to gauge where are the business development teams, where are they in this model, and where do they want to go. Now, if we start over here on the left, look at the bottom in blue. In the ad hoc or the reactive state, it's really hard to have an effective business development team. Most of them are unorganized or they're reactive. So a typical situation would look like this. A lawyer bumps into a client at a function and learns, oh, the client is soliciting RFPs. So the lawyer comes running back to the business development team with an immediate need for the team. I need you to write an RFP. And then the BD team spends a lot of time, a lot of energy writing and submitting the RFP. And then the firm doesn't win the deal. And this happens over and over again. Now, if we look to the right in the optimized or the differentiated state, those BD teams develop strategy that will uncover rainmaking opportunities. So people aren't running around trying to do it on their own. In these phases on the right, it's a very different conversation. You might say, you know what, we're going to decline submitting that RFP for this client because of a conflict of interest. Plus, we know from these 5 other times that we've submitted RFPs that this RFP is not going to pan out. Here's the data, here's the history we have on it. Or let's say you lost 5 attorneys. You'll be able to identify where are we vulnerable, where do we have to rebuild, or where are we building momentum with cases we've won? Should we go after more business there? On the right, this is where these firms have gotten to a point where they proactively know the proposal that a client needs before there's ever an RFP. They hand over the proposal before the RFP gets put out. Now, where are most of our clients? They're right around here. They're a little better than developing. They're kind of on the mature side of developing, so to speak. But getting from ad hoc all the way to differentiated, that's where it takes significant change and support from all levels. We're working with a lot of clients. They see the competitive landscape changing, and they know they have to push past internal barriers to get to be successful. There are 4 internal barriers that occur in this reactive and this developing stage. How do we get past that? How do we drive the change to get past that? Well, we're going to talk about how to deal with those barriers so that the team can move up the maturity model. Now, we talked about how you can have a great process, you can have access to technology. How do you influence the people? The 4 barriers are about people. So the 4 common sources of internal resistance are the data, the BD team, the project team, and the attorneys and staff. So let's talk about each one. The first barrier is the data and how this thing can take on a life of its own. The data stewards, they're pressured to clean data. The BD users are frustrated because they're trying to do their job and the data is not accurate. During the project initiation and the project planning phases down here in blue, we typically identify the goal for a BD pilot. So for example, are you targeting top clients or strategic accounts or maybe like a region of the country? Starting your initiative in a targeted way is perfect. It's absolutely the way to start. We'll need to dedicate cleanup time to the contacts in that targeted way. The caution, do not let your project get hijacked into becoming this whole data cleanup initiative. What does that mean? The project will get stalled because what you'll hear people say is, we can't make progress on this project because the data is too bad. We don't have time to improve our data. This is just not going to work. Get out of the vicious cycle so that you can advance the initiative. How do you do that? Through these 2 change management boxes. In your sponsorship roadmap, your team anticipates that you'll need to identify the priority on the targeted data in the pilot, and then you set those expectations that all the data is not going to be perfect from the start. It's just the data in your target. In your communication plan, you relay to the pilot participants and the data stewards and the BD users, we're only covering this targeted data. They need to know which contacts have to be ready to go at the initial rollout. But when you target your efforts in the right way, this is how you start building success. Don't get wrapped up in having perfect data for all those contacts, just the ones that you need. Barrier 2 comes from within your BD team. You may have a business development manager or a coordinator role that's responsible for responding to RFPs. So today, this role reacts to the attorney who needs an RFP right now. The new process, it may add a level of overhead that this person doesn't have today. When they hear that they have to use a new tool or run a new process, you should anticipate them to be frustrated. They may say something like, look, today all I have to do is type something into a spreadsheet and I go. In your new way, I got to pick a company, I have to find a match. How am I going to be responsive to the attorneys when I have to learn a new process, a new technology? It's taking too long. But here's the thing. If you keep putting off the new tool or the new process, you will perpetuate the challenges that the firm is trying to solve for. So don't ignore the frustration, don't write it off, but you can plan for the barrier in your sponsorship roadmap and your resistance plan. How can you structure the team to get coverage so that these people who are working with you don't have to be as responsive? The C-levels, the CMOs, the CBDOs, your business development manager, they should prep the leadership team that this is going to happen in the team. Yes, these tools will make us more strategic and effective, but it's not something that you just turn on and go. There will be short-term challenges, so the leadership team needs to be prepared for that. And they may not fully accept that it's going to take a little longer to do an RFP, but having those conversations early is key so that if you have to tweak your rollout to match expectations, you can do it. You're not playing a catch-up game later. Now, the resistance management part of the plan, this is for the BD team. Entering contacts into a spreadsheet doesn't bring other people into the process. So let's say that there's a firm goal to advance in cybersecurity. Being isolated with a spreadsheet on your desktop means no one else can contribute. No one else feels accountable when it's all on you. And the change management will absolutely fail when the perception is that one person is the owner because they have the data captured on their spreadsheet on their desktop. So the resistance management really gives permission to that BD coordinator or manager to say, we're trying this differently so that everybody is involved. So let's say you're using a technology like Business Edge so the project stays on track. Well, BE allows everyone to participate in the process through transparency and group accountability. It shows them what we're trying to do. So here's a report that you may share. This is a sample overview report, and it shows sponsors and the BD team, well, how are we doing? How are we progressing against our firm goal? So this is a sample dashboard. If you look over on the left, it shows, well, these are the number of new opportunities that we're getting now that we've started this project. And next to it is, these are the opportunities in progress. And next to that is, these are the outcomes, both by date and by type. Having some kind of report is going to build momentum for your project. And it's going to start showing that, yes, making these changes to the culture is having an impact. Our third barrier can be the project team. So the project team will want to come up with a process before the solution instead of coinciding with the solution. And the objection will be that, well, we have a process already, but this technology doesn't support it, so we can't use this technology. I'd encourage, think about your process as, what am I trying to achieve? It's not, I have a process and I need to follow it. During the project initiation, you'll have to set the executive expectation with the sponsors. Let them know our process is probably going to change. Now, what you're going to hear is, well, the current process is fine. The firm has won many matters. But here's the thing, you can have good outcomes with a bad process. You get lucky one time, and now people swear that this new way is the right way to do it. It's hard to break out of that mold. But here's what I equate it to. If any of you have been to Vegas or you've played roulette, what do they love to do? They post the last 10 winning numbers. It's totally useless information, but we think that it's great information, that because this number won, that's the number that I'm going to pick to win big money. It's the same kind of conversation to have with the leadership team to say, yeah, we've had this process and we've gotten lucky, but that doesn't mean it's a good process going forward. Once the CMO level set, now you communicate to the project team that they have the freedom to map a new process. Let the project team focus on the problem, not on the process. This part of the project is closely tied to what I have under the process design, and it comes with resistance management. This is where you need to be prepared for resistance to come up a lot when you start to change a process. And it's because you start to question assumptions. Here's what I mean by that. Over on the right, I have a quote from Thomas Paine's book, Common Sense. If any of you had to read this book in high school, you might recall that Thomas Paine wrote the book to persuade colonists in a new American republic to be forward-thinking about democracy in the face of long-standing monarchy. There were lots of people who were like, nope, monarchy is the way to go. This democracy is crazy. What are we thinking here? And he wrote, the long habit of not thinking a thing wrong gives the superficial appearance that it's right. So the project team needs to be able to ask very naive questions. Well, if we weren't doing it this way already, is this the way that we would do it? For example, we work 9 to 5, or we work Monday through Friday. We just assume that's the right time of day or the right days of the week. But we ask, well, what makes that right? What are we assuming? Encourage the project team to ask very naive questions. What we're trying to get to is the assumption. When you get to the assumptions, people might say, well, of course we work Monday through Friday. I'm not giving up my weekend. Well, should that look different? But you'll uncover the resistance to change. People aren't going to like it. They'll feel questioned about their expertise, their jobs. They'll say things like, well, other law firms aren't doing it, or we'll never get stakeholders to buy into the change. When you start hearing that, you are getting exactly to where you need to be. The project team should focus on the problem that the firm is trying to solve. There are lots of paths versus just the one path that we historically took. They'll look for opportunities to improve the process during the planning. This is what we're going for. They may think, well, okay, instead of passing around paper to have attorneys fill this out, what else can we do electronically? Can we do something over email? Can we integrate something? This is where we want them to go. Here's a sample of a dashboard that a project team can use to show progress on a new process. Now, I really just want you to focus on these 8 boxes that are kind of here towards the middle. So everyone knows, okay, law firms should be doing business development. But you want to share that progress with the users, especially if there was no information about BD before. This is going to help drive project expansion. People will get excited about it. So this report will show opportunities that are in play, and you can share information about the number of opportunities. You can organize it by lead attorney, by practice group, client type, opportunity type. Sharing this information will show that the new process is working. People will start to change their behavior. We've worked really closely with a large client here in Chicago who has created some amazing reports. They're really outstanding to show the kind of impact that the BD team is making. And people open this report every day to see who's on top, who isn't, what should we be doing. We're going to spotlight that company coming up, and I think in our Q4 training newsletter. But this will definitely work when people see what is everyone else doing. Now, our 4th barrier is the attorneys and the staff. So let's say that you've worked through the change management challenges with the data, the BD team, and the project team. We're moving ahead with a better process. Meanwhile, the attorneys have their own barriers to change. A reactive or ad hoc marketing or BD team, they respond to their needs. So why would they change? Well, it's back to the sponsorship roadmap, because many firms avoid having this expectation setting conversation because they think they won't have support to drive the attorneys. If the managing partner doesn't hold the attorneys accountable to their tasks, you're right, the initiative's not going to work. But that's another vicious cycle. If you don't hold them accountable, you can't show results on effective business development. So what do? You work with the friendly attorneys to drive this forward. Now, during the project implementation, here's where you'll start thinking through the training plan. Now, you might think, okay, Ellen's in education, shouldn't the training plan be earlier? but it actually shouldn't, because all those messages that you created during the sponsorship roadmap that target the attorneys, the BD team, the project team, you're going to repurpose all of those into your training plan. How many of you have implemented beautiful new processes only to find none of the users are actually doing it? And when you ask, well, why aren't they doing it the new way? What you typically hear is, well, they don't know how to use the system. So what do? We respond with, okay, well, then I guess we have to get them more training. The users need to know where to point and click, and I think we can, yes, we're just going to get them into more training. I can tell you, we've done this a long time, that more often than not, the underlying objection is, I don't know why I have to use the system. Lots of attorneys, they'll chase any opportunity, but they're going to resist using a system if all they see is additional work without a payoff. They have to know what's in it for them and the firm. They need to know how to target effectively and have data that shows the value of doing their business development the right way. Our most successful clients, when we engage with them to help with their end user training, they give us a framework so that we can tell a story while we're training the attorneys. We talk about retention rates thanks to the BD. We talk about where the firm's revenue has increased and who did what to get them there and when did they do those things. That's the story that helps to advance the training plan. Now, the final building block in change management is having a reinforcement plan as part of the project's closure. This means, like we said earlier, communication can't stop at the end of the project. It needs to keep going. But here's the caution. Many stakeholders, once the project wraps up, they ask you to make a prediction. How well is this process going to do in a year? It's not an exact science, okay? Making these predictions is actually a risk to your project because the prediction can be wrong, right? I've taught little kids, I've taught high school, I've taught college, I've taught adults in gen ed settings and special education. But I cannot walk into a room of kindergartners and predict who's going to be a great college student. Early predictions about the effectiveness of a project are dangerous. Information is golden because you can change the minds with the right information. Your reinforcement plan must include the sharing of data and of reports to show the success of the project. It doesn't end when the project is closed. That's how you'll build momentum to expand the project, actually. So here's one more report that I want to show you, a dashboard report that can support and reinforce. This shows outcomes by type, by practice group, and date. If you can show information on why a firm won or lost an opportunity, or the project should have an achievable goal in mind, and this report can help you get there. So pushing through those 4 key barriers will manage the change you need to effectively change the culture and implement your projects. For data, encourage change by showing small wins with a specific data set. For the BD team, proactively message to leadership that the BD team is going to take longer to respond as they learn a new process. The project team needs permission and encouragement to really examine your process to improve it. And the attorneys and staff will change their behavior if they see data that shows what's in it for them. I want to share a slide from the CounselLink user conference. CounselLink is a sister product for LexisNexis, and they manage the legal spend for corporate counsel. Earlier this year, these GCs gathered to network, gain insight on how to be efficient with outside counsel. This slide resonated when we showed it to many of them, and I thought it could also apply here. Just like we talked about with increasing the maturity model, GCs want to use business intelligence and predictive analytics. Most corporate counsel, they find themselves along this bottom left with these black dots. They're in the zone of showing what's happening. Who are they working with? How many outside counsel? What are the win rates? What's the spend? But they want to move to use data to predict what's next. They want to get into the upper right. Now, I heard a similar theme at last month's LMA Midwest conference. I heard many of our customers talking about how do we use predictive analytics to promote the firm's strategy. Well, I want to share the success of one of our clients as an example of how effectively they managed change and they're using predictive analytics. The client shifted toward a model of using predictive analytics to support the firm's long-term strategy. They gathered data on clients who were at risk of leaving. They had a control group of attorneys and a target group of attorneys. They gave the clients that they didn't really care about to the control group, and they gave the valued clients to the target group of attorneys. And they worked very closely with that target group of attorneys. They carefully managed the change along the way to break through the barriers about data and process. And so far, they have retained $15 million worth of matters from those at-risk clients. They worked through the internal barriers of the data, the project team, the BD team, and the attorneys, and they aligned a very careful change management strategy with their project management plan. It's a lot of work, but they just broke through that green barrier on the maturity model, and they are well paving the way towards getting over to that high end. That law firm's doing really well. For many of us, learning new behaviors pushes us out of our comfort zone. I love this quote from Ginny Rometty, the CEO at IBM. Growth and comfort don't coexist, but pushing to the next level as a change agent will help you to drive success. Now, we offer, I'd be remiss in not saying we offer lots of classes to include best practices, tips and tricks to push past barriers into effective workflows and projects. We've got the 101 series, the advanced concepts of 201, soup to nuts in 301, and we're happy to work with you. Plus, you have access to our training quarterly newsletter, free by a trainer sessions. We've got all that information on LexisNexis University. So we have a few minutes left. I would love to turn it over to you guys to hear what questions you have. If you haven't already, please connect with me on LinkedIn. You can also see our new 60-second video from our friendly InterAction trainer on the InterAction CRM LinkedIn page. So Dave, if you want to open it up or share any questions that we have from the group.
Thank you, Elena, for your very informative session. This does conclude the presentation portion of our webinar. As a reminder, if you do have any questions, please feel free to ask them via the questions pane located on your webinar control panel. Okay, I see some questions coming up here. The first question, Elena. The model of aligning change management with project management looks intense. Is this approach best for large law firms with skilled resources in both areas?
Okay, so it sounds like that question has to do with, it can seem daunting to take on change management and project management unless you're a really big law firm that has resources in both. So it doesn't have to be this way. We've worked with several firms that have limited resources. That is just a framework, so don't feel overwhelmed that it's too big and I don't know how to do all of that. If you take the smaller goals of a project and you work very targeted, in a targeted way to manage the change management, then that's just as effective as a really big project where there's a ton of resources. It's absolutely achievable. We've worked with clients to get us there, and it goes pretty well. Anything else?
Okay, very good. Yes, there's another question here. You said that one of the barriers is the data. How do you decide which data to start with?
Oh, great question. Okay, so there's no stock answer. Which data you start with should absolutely tie to one of the whichever firm goal you're trying to achieve. Like I said earlier, are you trying to expand into another area? Are you trying to expand into a region of the country? Did you just lose some attorneys, and now you've got to figure out how do we do a stopgap? Are you going after strategic clients or at-risk clients? whatever the firm goal is should be the primary driver, and then you pick the data set that supports that. That's what makes it not overwhelming.
Okay, very good. Continuing, if training is delivered later in the project management cycle, when do you create materials?
Oh, I love that question. So, yes, the training plan gets delivered during the implementation. Materials can be created earlier. I'm assuming you might be talking about when do we develop curriculum. Developing the curriculum is sort of like, which data do you pick? Once you have the firm goals, that's when you pick the data. Once you have the main messages on what we're trying to achieve, that should get woven into the curriculum development. Otherwise, you just create a point and click document, and it doesn't really tie like what's in it for them with the users. It's just not as valuable. So building the curriculum development materials can be happening during the first few phases of a project, but then you launch it during the implementation. Anything else? Okay. All right, well, thank you again to everyone who took the time today to join. I hope that you found it helpful. If you've got any kind of side questions, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to answer. And I hope everyone has a great day. Dave, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, well, we did get a couple of questions that came up. Do you have enough time to answer?
Sure, I've got time.
Okay, are these dashboards from the opportunities module?
The dashboards that I showed in the presentation came from the Business Edge module.
Okay, very good. And well, it looks like we are finished with our questions for now. That concludes today's webinar, and I would like to thank Elena once again for expert advice on driving change management, and to all of our attendees for taking time out of your busy day to join us. Just a few quick follow-up reminders. All attendees will receive an email within 1 week with a link to a recording of today's webinar and slides. In closing, there's a brief survey at the end of our webinar today that we ask you to please take a moment to complete, and your feedback will help us in planning our future webinars. Thank you all for your time today. I hope everyone has a great day.